All right, guys, we're digging in right now to chapter 17 with the different animal phyla. So let's go. I'm going to share my screen and we're starting with sponges. So let me do this real quick. Okay, so phylum Porifera, these are your sponges. You got calcareous sponges, glass sponges, siliceous, I don't know. Basically, you have different types of sponges that are made from mostly calcium, mostly silica, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these organisms, they're sessile, they do not move, capable of asexual and sexual reproduction. A huge thing, if you'll remember, about sponges is that they have no true tissues, okay? Multicellular, their body is a loose aggregation of cells, but remember, because they have no true tissues, these cells do not have specialized functions that function together, okay? They're all aquatic, mostly marine, meaning that mostly you're not going to find them in rivers, you'll find them in oceans, typically asymmetrical. And so what we know of as sponges are synthetic. They're not made from actual sponge organisms, but you do have some like that you would put in your bathtub, for instance. They're not really for washing dishes, but you have some like for washing your body that are real sponges. Okay, so phylum Porifera right here, if you trace this back, the only trait that they have compared to the rest of these animal phyla is that they have no true tissues, but they do have multicellularity just like the rest of them. Key features: porous bodies, no tissues, sessile, they are mostly marine. Now, they have what are called collar cells, and these collar cells are going to bring water and food in, filter out nutrients, and then it's going to send water and the wastes out. So basically, guys, that's all that it's really doing. You've got these porous bodies that are, through these collar cells, bringing in water and nutrients, filtering the water out, and then keeping those nutrients. All right, so now we're at phylum Cnidaria, and cnidarians are really interesting. So they've got two basic body types. You have the polyp, which is right here. It is stationary. And then you have the medusa here, which is free swimming. So think of like a jellyfish has this medusa shape. Okay, so it has special stinging cells that are called nematocysts. And those nematocysts, they actually have like chemicals inside of these cells that are sent into whatever the nematocyst touches. Capable of asexual and sexual reproduction. They are multicellular, just like any of these animals that we're going to be talking about today. Two tissue layers. So you have that ectoderm and the endoderm. So remember that the ectoderm is going to form its epidermis, and the endoderm is going to form its gastrointestinal tract. Okay. They are entirely aquatic, some freshwater, but mostly marine. Radial symmetry. So for instance, with like the medusa, with the normal cnidarian, think jellyfish. You could divide that jellyfish on any plane and you would have mirror images on either side. Okay, so stony corals in this phylum are responsible for building coral reefs, along with coralline algae. Coral reefs are some of the most productive of all ecosystems. So again, these stony corals are in phylum Cnidaria and responsible for coral reefs. That is amazing. Super, super, super productive ecosystems. So examples of organisms in this phylum are going to be jellyfish, hydra, corals, and sea anemones. Okay, so again, if you're looking at phylum Cnidaria with all of the cnidarians, you're gonna trace this back and you see, okay, so cnidarians, they have radial symmetry, two germ layers. What are those two germ layers? The ectoderm and the endoderm. They do not have a mesoderm. Trace this back and we know that they have true tissues as well as multicellularity. Key features of phylum Cnidaria. You have radial symmetry, two germ layers, and stinging cells. Remember, those stinging cells were called nematocysts. And you can actually see them here. Basically, once a nematocyst is discharged, it is going to, it's basically that stinging cell that is going to be released into the other organism, whatever it has come upon. So here is the polyp. This is the sessile version. And here is the medusa. This is the free swimming version. Okay, and here's your diversity. So jellyfish, hydra, this was in the example of radial symmetry. Then you have corals, which is awesome, and then sea anemones. All right, your phylum Mollusca. Examples in the mollusks are clams, snails, slugs, octopi, octopuses, squids, chitin, tusk shells. So hold on, let me move my box so I can see everything. You've got between 70,000 and 100,000 species. So this is a large phylum. Major body regions are going to be this broad, flat ventral foot. Okay, so here, if we've got a snail here, you've got the head. The rest of this body that is outside of that shell is called this foot, this muscular foot. And then everything, all of its body parts that are inside of the shell is called the thick visceral mass that may be protected by a shell. And then you've got the head. And so important to note, each of these is also seen in things like squids and octopus. Okay, let me move this back. So again, phylum Mollusca, you've got snails, scallops, and squids. So if you trace this back for mollusks, notice we skipped flatworms and we're also going to skip roundworms. But I mean, that's just because it's a whole lot of information, guys. So mollusks, if you are going to trace this back, we didn't talk so much about these guys, but you know that they're protostomes. So their mouth forms first in that gastrula stage. Trace this back more. They've got bilateral symmetry, meaning that you can only typically divide it down a single axis to get a mirror image on either side. They have 3 germ layers, so an ectoderm, an endoderm, and a mesoderm. They have true tissues and they are multicellular organisms. So this is what I would do when you're like writing down all of these differences in the phyla, is that I probably would have different sections in your notes for each of the different phyla, and then I would say phylum Mollusca examples, snail, scallop, squid, there are more on that other slide. I would copy that down, and then I would say, okay, it has all of these characteristics, not just the foot, the head, and the visceral mass, but also it's a protostome, 3 germ layers, bilateral symmetry, true tissues. All right, guys, so key features, you've got a mantle, a muscular foot, and a visceral mass. So that mantle is more or less going to be the head area. Huge diversity in your mollusks, but they're soft and unsegmented. Now, a lot of times, some of this like soft body is going to be protected by a shell, but as you can see, it's not always that case. Yeah. Okay, so phylum Annelida. Phylum Annelida, you've got segmented bodies, bilateral symmetry. You can only divide them down a single plane to get a mirror image on either side. Your body wall has circular and longitudinal muscle layers. It has a column, or this body cavity, meaning that the body cavity, this fluid-filled cavity, is completely within the mesoderm. It's a true column. Open and well-developed, circulatory system is closed. That means that the blood vessels are remaining, that the blood is remaining within your blood vessels. Hermaphroditic or separate sexes, okay? So different organisms can be either hermaphroditic, having both sexes in the same organism, or separate sexes. Terrestrial, freshwater, and marine species. Examples are going to be earthworms, lugworms, and leeches. Most annelids are grazers. They eat detritus, serve as prey for other organisms, et cetera, et cetera. Burrows of earthworms increase the drainage and aeration of soils. Okay, so they are, okay, so they're more or less at the bottom of the food chain, but they serve really important purposes in their ecosystems. Okay, so you have earthworms, leeches, and polychaetes. We're going to talk about what the heck that means, but if you trace back annelids, you can see, again, we didn't really talk about this. They are protostomes, form the mouth first, bilaterally symmetrical, 3 germ layers, ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, true tissues, multicellular. All right, annelids, they are segmented worms. Your key features: segmentation, protostomes, forming that mouth first. You've got bilateral symmetry, 3 germ layers, true tissues, multicellularity. Okay, I'm thinking if I will ask y'all some of this. Okay, so the colon, remember that's that body cavity that's completely surrounded by the mesoderm. What else will I ask you? You've got this ventral nerve cord that basically runs the entire length of this worm, of this segmented worm. What else? Bristles. Okay, we're going to talk about your bristles because all of the annelids have them. And they do function for locomotion, for moving through the soil or moving through the water and things like that. So worms with segmented bodies, true column, used as a hydrostatic skeleton. So basically it's going to function for support and for structure of its internal body cavity, okay? All right, so it's terrestrial, freshwater, and marine, 3 groups. Now, this is where we're gonna talk about some of these like bristles, okay? You have these groups: earthworms, leeches, and polychaetes. 3 groups, okay? So ignore the oligochaete for a second. Earthworms, leeches, and polychaetes. Okay, now you have 2 different types of organisms within those 3 groups. You have oligochaetes and you have polychaetes. Now, the difference is that a chaete is talking about those bristles that I told you that all of these organisms would have. Oligo means few, so you've got few of these bristles in the earthworms and the leeches. They're small, they're difficult to see, they are reduced in size, and there aren't very many of them. Versus a polychaete, as you can see, they're full on, like, they're not really just bristles, they're legs. I mean, they're used for locomotion. So oligochaete, you've got few bristles in earthworms and leeches. Polychaetes have many of these bristles, okay? Many of these bristles. Now, another difference is that the oligochaetes, earthworms and leeches, these are hermaphroditic, meaning that they've got both male and female parts, okay? Versus in the polychaetes, you have separate sexes. So you'll have a female or a male. All right, so we're gonna go through these 3 different groups of annelids. Your first is the earthworms. They eat their way through the soil. They extract nutrients as they pass through it. So literally, as they're physically moving through the soil, like their mouth is open, they're like eating that soil, taking nutrients from it, and then eliminating at the anus. Those eliminations are going to improve the soil quality. As you can see, they can get freaking huge, 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 huge. Leeches, free-living carnivores that live in a variety of habitats, mostly marine or freshwater habitats. Strong jaws, hundreds of tiny teeth that will cut through skin, remember, because they're carnivores. And the way that they're able to do this, a lot of times by going undetected, is because their saliva, you know, before or right after they have bitten, contains this anesthetic. Okay, so the anesthetic is going to make sure that the organism doesn't feel much pain when they latch onto them. An anticoagulant means that the blood will not clot as it is sucking blood from their prey. Okay, so blood will continue flowing as long as it is attached, as long as it's physically attached. Now, some are approved for medicinal uses. For example, if you have a clotting problem, you have a clotting issue, or if sometimes, like if you have blood circulating problems, like if you, maybe we're in a surgery and blood is not really coming back to that area after surgery, they can put leeches on that area of skin. The leeches will physically bring the blood back to that area. So it actually is pretty incredible. Then you have your polychaetes. Notice you've got these long bristles that are forming, that are helping them move around. These polychaetes, many of these bristles. So they crawl on or burrow on the sea floor, hard bristles for movement, segments with appendages used for respiration and disposal of metabolic wastes. Okay, now, so we're past annelids. We're not discussing roundworms. Now we're going to talk about arthropods. Arthropods are freaking awesome. So arthropods, you've got exoskeletons and jointed appendages. Exoskeletons and jointed appendages. So your examples for phylum Arthropoda: trilobites, chelicerates, myriapods, crustaceans, and insects. And you've got over 1 million species of arthropods. Just remember their defining characteristics: exoskeletons with jointed appendages. Okay, so jointed appendages, exoskeleton segmentation in Arthropoda. Now, there are a couple of important things about arthropods, including their jointed appendages, but also the fact that these jointed appendages, each like segment of the body, the head, the thorax, and the abdomen, have separate functions, okay? So for example, like jumping, flying, and then the head. So your arthropods are going to be distinguished based on mouth parts. These are important in classifying your different arthropods. So first, arthropod mouth part is your chelicerae. These chelicerae are going to be on things like spiders and ticks, okay, versus mandibles. You're going to see mandibles on things like fleas and on things like ants, okay? So mandibles versus chelicerae. Okay, segmented animals with jointed appendages. Segments are specialized in functions. All of them possess an exoskeleton. Now we're going to go through the 5 subphyla, which are those trilobites, the chelicerae, the we'll go through them. The mandibulates, is that one? Okay. Let's talk about this. Trilobites, these are extinct marine organisms. Extinct marine organisms. They are grouped by their mouth parts. So you have, Trilobites are not grouped by their mouth parts. Here, we are talking about all of those 5 subphyla. So your 5 subphyla of Arthropoda, you've got the trilobites, which are extinct. Here are trilobites. And then the last 4, okay, 2 through 5, all of these are grouped by their mouth parts. So chelicerates have chelicerae, and then crustaceans, millipedes, and centipedes, and insects, they all have those their mandibulates. We're going to go through each of these. Trilobites are extinct marine arthropods. There are amazing fossils of trilobites. They are freaking insane. This is what it looks like, a fossil of a trilobite. And then here is what it looks like when it's all like cocooned into its exoskeleton. It's pretty crazy. Then we have chelicerates. These include horseshoe crabs, ticks, spideys, and scorpions, spiders and scorpions. And remember, chelicerates, they have these mouthpieces called chelicerae. Our next subphylum, millipedes and centipedes. they are called myriapods. Okay, so millipedes and centipedes, they're called myriapods. They're a group of mandibulates, meaning that a group of mandibulates have mandibles, just like ants, just like fleas. Okay, another group of mandibulates are the crustaceans. So your crustaceans is your next subphylum. These are crabs, shrimp, lobsters as examples of mandibulates. Insects are also mandibulates. So this is your last subphylum for arthropoda. Insects include cicadas, dragonflies, beetles, moths, ants, okay? Insects are mandibulates. And then insects, they account for the vast majority of arthropod diversity. So huge diversity in the insects. Incredible diversity in insects. All right, guys, I know we're going quickly. If you needed to go back over arthropods, I don't blame you at all whatsoever. Please do that. And yeah, pause this and just go back. That's the beauty of recorded lectures. So our next phylum that we're going to talk about, and the last phylum that we're going to talk about in this video, are your echinoderms. So echinodermata, you've got organisms like sand dollars, sea stars, and sea urchins. All of these are going to, instead of having well, here's the thing. Echinoderms, so like a starfish, for instance, does this have bilateral symmetry? No, it has radial symmetry, but as embryos, they do have bilateral symmetry. All right, so radial symmetry as adults, spiny skin, it's got a water vascular system, which basically means that water is going to all right, so your water vascular system, basically you're like, water comes into these canals and it's pumping nutrients throughout this organism's body. And then you've got the pore where it is going to shoot out. Okay. All right. So like we said, sand dollar, sea cucumber, sea star, and sea urchins. So they're deuterostomes, meaning that their mouth is formed second. The anus is formed first, mouth is formed second. Bilateral symmetry, they are bilaterally symmetrical as like in the larval stage. It has 3 germline, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, here are the key features. Okay, so some characteristics: spiny skin, sessile or slow-moving marine organisms. Okay, and look, bilateral larva, radial adults. So here is your larva. We actually saw a picture of this when we went through the starfish life cycle. As an adult, it's got this radial symmetry. As a larva, it's got the bilateral symmetry. The colon is present, so it's this body cavity surrounded completely by that mesoderm. Complete digestive tract, so it has a mouth and an anus. No segmentation, no cephalization, et cetera, et cetera. Other features, it's got that water vascular system. All right, so the water vascular system is a system of canals that are going to circulate water throughout that body, okay? Throughout this organism's body. So the functions are for gas exchange, waste disposal, locomotion, and feeding. It literally is going to filter water that is going to help it do all the things that it would need to do, right? But instead of relying on just a circulatory system to do that, it's relying on the system of canals. It's also got tube feet for movement, gripping, and collecting oxygen. Yeah, okay. And then if you haven't seen the mouthpiece of a starfish, it's right here on the underside in the center, and it literally is just like sucking in whatever this organism is, some mollusk. So guys, we're stopping there before we get to phylum Chordata. We're going to talk about the chordates in the next video. So let me stop sharing this. Core dates in the next video. We are part of the core dates. Don't miss it.